right, this week we're looking at Proverbs 31, verses 10 to 31. It is the final lesson in the book of Proverbs, and it's often entitled Woman of Valor, and that comes from the opening lines of what is a poem. It can be understood on multiple levels. First of all, it's often been understood and interpreted as a type of the ideal wife. It can also be seen as the fruit of a life lived by wisdom, as well as conclusion for the entire book of Proverbs. It is an acrostic poem, which means that each line of the poem begins with the next letter in the alphabet of the Hebrew alphabet, that is. Um, in Jewish cultures, it is often read on the Sabbath uh, by the husband to the wife in Jewish homes. It's also been noted that it is written in a similar pattern of a hymn or a psalm. So see, for example, Psalm 121 that reflects some of the themes that are in um, this proverb. There are 8 sections in this proverb um, that uh, relate to each other. The first is a general praise of the woman of valor. Uh, that's found in verses 10 to 12. The second section is 13 to 15. Her industrial household pursuits. Verses 16 and 18 talk about financial success. Verses 19 and 21 emphasize how she looks after and cares for and clothes both her family and the poor. Verses 22 to 24 reflect and talk about the diligence that brings honor to her husband. And verse 25 to 27 talks about prosperity and wisdom, how wisdom protects you from harm and blesses your life. Verses 28 to 29 emphasize the fact that her children arise and call her blessed, as does her husband. This really emphasizes the fact that it is a true blessing. Uh, it wouldn't be unusual for wealthy men and women to receive praise from their neighbors, maybe hoping to get something back, but in the case, it's the most intimate relationships within the family that recognize the blessedness of um, this woman and also the benefits of wisdom. And finally, verses 30 to 31 are general praise. Again, like it closes the way that it begins in praising the woman of valor. So, what do we learn from these last few verses? I think that we want to be clear that there's truth in both ways of looking at this proverb, but there's also limitation in looking at it merely as uh, an ideal wife, let's say. And there's a number of reasons for this. First of all, we don't have any discussion about relationships, how this ideal wife would treat her husband or her children. So that's kind of a limitation here. Also, very few, if any, women in the time of reading this would have access to all the resources that this woman has access to. In other words, this would be a very wealthy household indeed if the woman was able to go out and do all these investments and stuff like that. So it would be out of the reach of many of the people who would have read this poem. But on the positive side, and we kind of see this reflected in the fact that it would be, it's potentially read every Sabbath by the husbands to their wives. It's an acknowledgement and an honoring of the role of the woman in the life and family and in the home. It's interesting that in Hebrew, the word for home is often represented by the word for wife. So just like we might say that, a person's household represents, their overall domestic situation in Hebrew, uh, the word wife could also represent in the same similar way the word home. So with those thoughts in mind, so there's the pros and the cons of looking at it as a model. Let's look at it more generally, and what do we learn from these verses? First of all, and here and to the end of this discussion now, we're talking about the blessings of wisdom, how wisdom blesses your life. And so we see that um, this woman of valor um, just experiences blessing not only to her own family, but to those around her. And I think that is um, true of a life lived after wisdom, that this is the fruit of wisdom, is blessing. And also the fruit of wisdom is that not only are we blessed, but we bless others. It brings prosperity. And I'm not talking about the prosperity gospel where if you give so much money to the church, God's going to bless you. That is a heresy. God doesn't have to do anything for us. But in the act of giving, in the act of charity, in the act of living wise and faithful lives, the general outcome of that, the fruit of that kind of investment is prosperity, that God will prosper us. He'll certainly prosper us spiritually, but it has happened over and over again that just living wise lives leads to material prosperity as well. Again, I want to just reiterate that's not a guarantee, but that's a general principle, right? We talked about in Proverbs, the cause and effect, reaping what we sow. That's that's ideal and often the case, but there are exceptions. We could look to Job as the most obvious one. But there are righteous people who suffer. But as a general principle, those who live lives of following God are blessed by it. Wisdom also builds character. You know, the phrase here that really stands out for me that is charm is deceptive, beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. And that is true of a woman. It's also true of men, Lord, that if we follow closely after the Lord and seek to live a life that's pleasing to Him, not only is our outward conduct improved, but our character is strengthened and built up. And that's really the goal of our lives, is to become better human beings, to better reflect our Lord Jesus Christ. And so that's very important. And that's the last message we see, that wisdom is lasting and authentic. Charm is deceptive. It doesn't mean that all charm is lying, but it's deceptive in its intent because it is using compliments to um, manipulate you. So there's a deception there. Uh, Beauty is fleeting. Our ideals of beauty, our ideals of success are very narrow. But true, um, authentic life, wisdom, the fear of the Lord as the central grounding for that wisdom, that that is both authentic and eternal, in fact. It stands the test of time and it will stand beyond time into eternity. So that's kind of a fitting end to our study of Proverbs. Uh, Very early on, we saw that the fear of the Lord was key to being wise, the attitude of humility, and so that is also the closing statement of Proverbs as well. All right, that's the study of Proverbs. Hope you've enjoyed it.